Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we're in Walsall. On tonight's panel, Damian Green, formerly Theresa May's de facto deputy. Before that, Work and Pensions Secretary, currently an influential backbench MP and chairman of the One Nation group of Tory MPs. Louise Haigh, Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, previously Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland, and the youngest MP of the 2015 Labour cohort at Westminster. Businessman, television presenter, farmer and founder of his own range of food products, The Black Farmer, and former Conservative candidate Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones. Charlotte Ivers, journalist and broadcaster, political correspondent at Times Radio and columnist for the Sunday Times, and award-winning screenwriter and playwright responsible for TV series such as This Is England, His Dark Materials and the COVID care home drama Help, Hollywood movies, as well as many theatre productions including Harry Potter, Jack Thorne. Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to our audience here in Walsall. Good to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. And do join in the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. And let's hear what you've got to say. Right, our first question tonight is from Christy Kyriakopoulou.
Families are truly struggling with the cost of living. We are being told this week to consider buying value products and to contain and manage our household budget. Are our politicians from all parties patronising, clueless or inhumane?
And Chrissy, you're referring to comments by the Environment Secretary George Eustice this week about saving money by buying branded products. What's your response to that, your question?
I just think it's really demoralising. Everyone's counting on every single pound. I would be interested to see how much savings these MPs have in their bank account and how they divide all their savings. I'm not telling them what to buy or what to purchase. I just think it's a bit rude, and it is humane. There are people really struggling out on the streets now, and I've got friends and family who are really struggling. They haven't got enough food to put on the table, and then they've been told to go buy value items. I just think it's disgusting, if I'm honest. I was really shocked that he said that and was confident how he delivered it.
And, of course, this is coming on the back of the inflation forecast to go over 10%, possible recession looming next year. I mean, Damian Green, what did you think of those comments by George Eustice?
I think it being slightly unfair to George, he didn't say that. He said that's what people were doing. He wasn't telling people. Politicians shouldn't tell people how to lead their lives. I think that's very sensible. But, I mean, the underlying point is a perfectly fair one. We are in the middle of a howling global economic crisis. Inflation's bad in this country, it's bad in the EU, it's bad in the US, it's about the same. And the government is trying to support people as much as possible. It spent £22 billion on various support measures. Only last month, the council tax rebate for those in the lower-rated bands has come in with £150. The warm homes discount has been now extended to 3 million people.
But inflation's going to outstrip all that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the national living wage is going to go up as well, which will help. And I think the biggest one, which will help those who really are struggling, is the household support fund, which has doubled from 500 million to £1 billion. No, it's never enough. Right. At 10% inflation, it's going to be very difficult to do enough. But the light, I think, is the way we've come out of the pandemic, where people were predicting that we would have 10% inflation, 10% unemployment, and in fact, unemployment's less than 4%. Actually, all those measures, those very expensive measures...
And, of course, it is forecast to rise, unemployment as well, next year.
Well, maybe, but let's see. It was forecast to rise through the pandemic and didn't. That was genuinely a huge achievement.
Well, I think that what you've just outlined demonstrates how the vast majority of people in this country are feeling at the moment. And I've obviously been knocking on countless doors across the country for this local elections today. And what I have encountered is real fear about how people are going to pay their energy bills, how people are going to afford their weekly shop, how people are affording to fill up their car at the petrol pump, because prices are far outstripping most people's wages and certainly eating into people's savings at the moment. And the response, I'm afraid, Damian, is just frighteningly small in the scale of the crisis that people are facing. We are going to see the biggest collapse in living standards this year since records started to be drawn up in the 1950s. And I'm afraid Rishi Sunak's spring statement, which just showed how completely out of touch the government are with the way that ordinary people are living their lives at the moment. 12 years in of Tory rule, and we have the Prime Minister telling 77-year-old Elsie, who became famous this week, that she should be grateful for discounted bus fares when she's having to ride the bus because she can't afford to heat her home. The government would like to tell you that there is nothing more that they can do, that it is entirely global factors. Of course, there are global factors behind the massive inflation that we are seeing, but there is far more that the government could be doing to step in and help people. For example, this week, we've also seen record profits from Shell and BP, $16 billion in excess profit that they didn't expect to earn this year, and yet the government is still refusing to apply a windfall tax, as Labour has set out that they could do, that would cut people's energy bills.
There's a lot of hands up. Let's hear from some of you. The man in the pink sweater at the very back.
Just to go back on what you said there, Damian, he did actually say that people should manage their budgets better by choosing more value brands. So you've just said that, obviously, that he wasn't telling people how to live. But he was. He
said what he said.
Cheaper.
I can tell you the. He said what people find is by going for value brands, own branded products, they can actually contain and manage their household budget. That's actually what he said.
So which was descriptive. That's what I said. He said. So I think it's unfair to say he was lecturing people. He really wasn't. But in a sense, it's a side issue anyway, isn't it?
But when families are already doing that, where do you go?
Yeah. Well, that's why I went through all those support measures. But
the woman in the red cardigan and glasses.
So why aren't the government actually thinking about people's health? You've got people with dietary requirements. You've got the NHS at one point asking us to be healthy as possible. And then we've got the government saying valued brands. We know valued brands aren't as good for us. You're telling us to do something that isn't healthy for us. You've got people, it's either heating or eating. At the moment, the government doesn't care about our health at all. So how does that make us feel when you're not prioritising our health? All you want us to do is save money when you guys aren't helping us.
OK, I think that the makers of some own label brands might take issue with the fact they're not as healthy as others. The man there in the blue jacket and white shirt, yes.
OK, I feel that the government are not listening to anything that the public are saying. They have the ability to make lives better. We have so much more homelessness in this country than we did 12 years ago. We've got so many more charity shops, we've got so much more food banks, and yet we don't see this in the rest of Europe. Why are we suffering like this when the government could be doing a lot more?
Okay, Wilfred.
Yeah, I want to answer the question about value brands. This is probably what a lot of you don't know, is that if you are asked to get a valued brand, it means you're having to compromise on quality. Take something as simple as a sausage, for example. If you're going to
we should point out, obviously, that you make sausages and have your own premium, fairly pricey brand of them.
I know a lot about sausages. And so just look at the back of the pack when you see a packet of sausages that is very, very cheap and see what is the meat content in that. It may be that when you're buying your chicken that looks very, very cheap. Where is that chicken coming from? Is it being flown in from Thailand? Is it actually coming from Poland? So actually saying to people that they should go for value brands is saying they need to be compromising on their quality and, as that lady said before, on their health. So I do not think that's the right answer. There is a real crisis going on. I'm in the middle of massive negotiations with the supermarkets at the moment to try and get a price increase. Most of them have said yes, but there's one of them that's sticking out that won't actually give me the price increase that we need. And what happens to companies like mine...
When you say prices, just you want them to pay you more, or you want them to increase the price of your product?
No, so the manufacturer comes and say, Wilfred, look, the price has gone up, boy, with all the price of petrol and all that, it is going to cost you more. Now, either we get more from the supermarkets or we go bust. It's as simple as that. And in this crisis, the ones who really get squeezed are the small suppliers like ourselves. And what you need is these big players to be able to understand. As I said, most of the supermarkets are being fine, but some of them stick out and say no. And they say no, knowing that the consequences is that you will go bust. So what I would say is this: with this crisis, you can't blame the public for it. There are global factors that need to be taken into consideration. So I am not a politician. I do not know what the economists should come up with, but, I think it would be unfair if we as businesses got this support with the government during COVID, and then ordinary people who are struggling and suffering, whether it's heat or eat, are not going to be helped. And I think it would be criminal if we don't really help these people.
One here in the front. Yes, you.
I think at the moment, across the Tory party, there's either a willful ignorance or a complete lack of being in touch with the communities. You know, I'm a middle-income earner. I have to balance childcare costs, working full-time, paying rent, fuel bills, and there's nothing for us other than 20% childcare, tax-free childcare. It doesn't work. It's not enough. They're not doing enough.
I mean, Damian has just listed a whole load of things that the government are doing.
They don't impact me. As a middle-income earner, they don't help me at all.
OK, man here in the check shirt.
I think we're being rather unfair on the government. Mr Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, was asked about receiving a £250,000 a year income on the side of being Mayor and described that as piffling. We have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who's got non-dom issues going on in his family because he has to maximise his income. And we have a health minister who I think at some stage in his life was also a nom-dom in order to ensure that his taxes, that he maximised his income.
If you're referring to the Health Secretary. So far you started by saying, I think we're being too hard on the government.
I think we are.
It doesn't sound like you are so far.
I think we are, because what you said was we mustn't blame the public, we must look at the government. We mustn't look at this government. This government were perfectly honest about who they were and about the money they've got and the way they spend it. It's our fault for putting them there.
Jack.
Yeah, it's a really, really worrying time, and people call it a cost of living crisis. I think it's a cost of living emergency. We're in real trouble, and I'm really scared about what's going to happen next. And the fact that 23.5 million people are going to have to make really, really difficult choices. And it is the most vulnerable in our society that's going to suffer. And it is a historical problem. It's not just something that's happened in the last 12 months. It is something that's happened since austerity, so-called austerity, where the government made a lot of very political decisions about how they were going to save money. And the way that they saved money, generally, was by cutting benefits. And so we've got this ridiculous universal credit, which doesn't make sense. The loss of legacy benefits and the way that legacy benefits have moved across to universal credit, it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful, and it's going to lead to people dying. And I'm really, really scared.
Charlotte.
I suppose I'd like to go back to your question right at the very start, the question of whether Westminster is
patronising, clueless or inhumane, I think were your words.
I wouldn't use any of those words. I would say insulated. I think MPs are extremely well paid by anyone's metric. They've just had a pay rise, which I'm sure makes them relatively rare in this room. Some of them are better than others. A lot of them are really listening and really in tune. And a lot of the way that gets through to them is watching things like this. So hopefully there'll be a lot of them at home tonight who'll be watching. If you get in contact with your MP, if you are struggling, that does cut through. I'm a journalist. I speak to MPs. They say to me, you should see my inbox. You should see how many people are getting in touch with me, telling me about their problems. And that's how they start worrying. I'd say as well, I speak to a lot of people on Whitehall behind the scenes. They know this is a problem. They know it's about to get worse. You're absolutely right. This is about to get worse. And I keep being told that there are plans to do something. In autumn, there will be plans to do something. I don't know what that is, but I hope it's enough. And that's all I can do at this moment.
Woman there in the pink cardigan.
Do we not think, though, that the government were really happy to give out loads of money during COVID? I read somewhere 170 billion was spent on COVID measures, like £5,000 per person. And that would make a really big impact now, because not all of the money spent during COVID was spent wisely. Things like huge numbers of lateral flow tests, which were needed, but did we need as many? PPE that's just sat in warehouses not been used. And actually, if we'd maybe saved a little bit of money then, would we not have more money now that they could, even if it was £1,000 per person, that would be all everyone's energy bills crisis, gone.
And there in the glasses.
Damian, you listed out these support measures, things like increasing national living wage and things like that. Won't that also cause inflation? Isn't this just kicking the can down the road?
And talking of kicking the can down the road, we do hear, as Charlotte mentioned, that potential plans to do more in October to help people. What can you tell us about those?
Well, I'm not in the government, so... and they
what do you hear?
They won't have decided yet, because what will happen in the autumn is the budget, and clearly one of the big problems that everyone is facing are energy costs, and we don't know what energy costs will be like by October, because that's obviously hugely dependent on the progress of the war in Ukraine and what that does to oil and gas prices. But to pick up the point a couple of people have made, absolutely, the government spent the best part of £400 billion on getting us through COVID. And one of the effects of that is that far more people, millions of people are in jobs who wouldn't be. All those jobs could easily have disappeared. And if they had done, we would have not just 10% inflation, but 10% unemployment as well. And that would make life for poor people much worse even than it is now. I get that. So, but having spent that money once, you can't spend it again, because the gentleman just made the point about inflation. If the government just kept spending money, then in the end, that flows through the system and causes worse inflation. So it's a difficult balancing act. It's a tough job being Chancellor of the Exchequer, and it's particularly tough at a time of a global crisis. But the idea that the government can keep spending money, which is in the end your money, governments don't have any money, all the money they get they raise from taxes, and if they tax businesses, then businesses respond by laying people off, so it affects people as well. However the government gets money, it comes from your pockets in the end. So actually picking the right level of money to spend in a crisis is really difficult, and we are in a howling crisis at the moment.
The man in the corner, yes, with the glasses.
Well, basically my question is that we keep talking about how much MPs get paid and everybody else. But I think people need to look at their own local authorities and see how much directors and senior directors of their local authorities get paid. It's a huge amount. So they actually get, from what we've seen, they get paid more than the MPs get paid. So, and these are the people who we're supposed to support us as local residents. So how does that work?
OK. The man in the flowery sweater.
I just want to raise the point, actually, about, obviously, you saying the government's bailed out, and bailed all the independent businesses out. You need to protect that investment now. I'm a small business owner at things. I'm paying my electricity for my little shop has gone from 22 pence a kilowatt hour to 77 pence. I have no protection of a price cap, so I have no idea how much my energy is going to go up to. I employ 3 other people that in the very near future looks like I'll have to make redundant because I've got no further protection of that investment that the government gave me to bail through COVID. So, the points are, you have to make sure that if you're going to just hand out money, that it's followed up and made sure that that money is working and protected. It's like a company that's just made £7 billion and we're told, we can't give them a Windrush a windfall tax because it's going to stop them investing in renewable energy. And 2 years ago, the government took only, I think it was £257 million because the drop in oil and gas prices. So when the government takes a hit, why shouldn't they be taking a windfall tax?
They do pay more tax because they pay corporation tax at much higher levels than normal companies. So when they make more profits, they pay billions in extra in tax.
The Chancellor's hinting that policy may change, that the government may consider introducing
you can. I mean, we take a load of money from oil companies, quite rightly, and there are ways you can take more. It doesn't necessarily need to be a windfall tax.
Do you think there should be a windfall tax?
The problem with windfall taxes is that they are one-off. And they make life unpredictable for businesses, and every business knows they want a degree of predictability. So the fact that oil companies pay corporation tax, you
putting a carbon tax.
And they have made
you don't need a windfall tax. Putting a carbon tax.
The chief financial officer of BP has said they've got more money than they know what to do with. He has explicitly said it will not deter investment, that the windfall tax will not stop them investing in renewable energy or their North Sea oil and gas exploration. This money is sitting there on their balance sheets whilst people are wondering how they're going to heat their homes. Yes, political choices are difficult, Damian, but the government is deciding to side with the oil and gas companies rather than those pensioners who are struggling to heat their homes.
It's not sitting there because those profits are taxed. They pay corporation tax on those profits. And as I say, we as a country charge higher rates of corporation tax for oil companies precisely because they can shed loads of money and that funds benefits and so on. And so if they make more profits, they pay more tax.
OK, I'm going to move on as you all drop your hands, because there's lots of questions that you asked which I want to get around to. Before I do, I just want to tell you where we're going to be next week. We will be in Hackney in London, where we will be joined by champion Formula 1 driver Sebastian Vettel. So, yes. So if you want to come along and be part of that audience, that kind of ooh I'm hearing there. If you want to come along and be part of that, well, there'll be politicians as well, you know. If you want to come along and be part of that audience in Hackney, go to the Question Time website and you can apply there. And the following week we'll be in Liverpool. That's on the 19th of May. So do apply to be in the audience. If you're Hackney or Liverpool, we'd love to see you. All right, let's take another question now from Gervir Deo.
Do local Conservative candidates deserve to be punished in the local elections because of the Prime Minister and other Conservative MPs' actions?
Right, and it's worth mentioning that Conservative candidate leaflets in Hartlepool bore the message this Thursday, i.e. today, please don't punish local Conservatives for the mistakes made in Westminster. Wilfred?
I didn't really hear the question, actually.
So the question is, do local Conservative candidates deserve to be punished in the local elections today because of the Prime Minister and other Conservative MPs' actions?
Well, I predict that we will be punished, but this sort of stuff tends to happen in halfway through a parliament. One of the questions that I was hoping to come up, and I don't know if somebody's asked, is this thing between Partygate and Beergate. And one of the things I think that we have to start looking at is when you start to just rake up dirt, if you dig deep enough, you could always find people who've done things wrong. And I think that what we need to try and do with our politics is to be results-driven rather than, at the moment, it's all about personality. And I just think that actually we do get punished. What everybody has to focus on is who is the party that is going to deliver. And that, for me, I will forgive anything. I will forgive people making mistakes whilst they deliver. And if we do get a slight beating, I hope that when we come to the big election, people say we're going to vote on who delivers results. And love him or hate him, we have to say that Boris has delivered.
Charlotte?
Yeah.
Hang on. Sorry, were you... Whoa. Hang on a minute. I'll come to you. Let me get around the panel. Charlotte.
I always think local elections are really tricky because when your votes are counted, they don't really know what you're voting for. Are you voting, as you say, to send a message to a national politician, or are you just voting to say who you want to be in charge of your bin collections? So it basically comes down to personal choice, really. What is it that you care about? Do you care about sending a message? Do you care about local services? One thing I will say, and polls are now closed, so this won't make a difference to anyone's vote, but it's a point that I think is worth making from my experience of speaking to many MPs. If you voted today to remove Boris Johnson, to send a message to the Tories that they should get rid of Boris Johnson, I think you are going to be disappointed, because my sense now from Conservative MPs is they want to move on from all of this. They don't see someone who is a viable alternative to him. I think if that was your aim, probably that won't have worked. If your aim was to get better bin collections, I hope it does work.
OK, the woman in the pink cardie.
I agree with just what was said about the Beergate versus Partygate. It just feels to me at the moment like every politician, or it feels like that, has actually been doing something maybe that they shouldn't have been. And actually, I'm not saying that we can just forgive and forget, but we do need to probably move on from it. But it would be so much better, in my opinion, if they just put their hands up when they've been caught out, rather than trying to say it was a work meeting, or, you know, I don't personally have work meetings at 10 o'clock at night with beer or, you know, birthday cake. So I think that actually just say, sorry, I got it wrong. And I think people would probably be a lot more willing to kind of forgive and forget then.
Should Keir Starmer be saying sorry?
Well, look, I think there was a big difference. There was a big difference between the two events. Keir, last year, was during the local elections campaigning, like I've been doing today and for the last few weeks. He broke to eat and then carried on working afterwards. And the Durham police investigated it at the time and found no rules were broken. Compare that to the Metropolitan Police having to investigate Downing Street because Sue Gray's report found hundreds of pieces of evidence of law-breaking that has led to already 50 criminal fines, making number 10 Downing Street the most fined workplace in Britain.
But hang on a second, how is Keir Starmer having a beer and a curry, we understand, in Durham, different to a gathering in Downing Street where a birthday cake is brought along, is eaten or not eaten, we can't really be sure, and then a meeting takes place afterwards?
Because the laws were very clear at the time and in the different periods of lockdown. That's why Durham police have been clear that no laws were broken.
So what exactly is the difference? Just explain it to us.
Well, the various parties in Downing Street were pre-arranged.
No,
social
just talking
events.
about the one with the birthday cake.
Well, that was, by all accounts, pre-arranged, a social event. No work was involved. And again, the Metropolitan Police has found that. This isn't me as a politician defending one side over the other. This is the police have investigated both incidents and found one to have broken the rules and another already, with more likely to come, 50 fines given to Downing Street. But I think, you know, it's not just raking muck, though, is it? This is absolutely unprecedented that the Prime Minister of our country has received criminal sanctions for rules that he set during COVID and during lockdown and asked the rest of us to follow religiously, which we did because we wanted to protect others. And I think, you know, I understand the intention and the want to move on from this and focus on the issues that really matter. But I think a lot of people will struggle to move on because of the terrible sacrifices that they were asked to make, whilst politicians, frankly, were breaking them with impunity.
Woman at the back with the glasses, yes.
I think my issue is just Westminster as a whole. I think the stories that are coming out, it sounds as if it's a gentleman's only club. Why do they need 8 subsidised bars in the workplace? Yes, they work late. Do they really need 8 subsidised bars? I really don't think so. I think the stories of misogyny and sexual harassment isn't a good example to encourage women and people in minorities to go into politics. I think the whole ethos of Westminster needs a complete overhaul.
Woman here.
I think is also the problem that it filters through as well. So I do campaigning for special educational needs and I go into council meetings quite regularly. And the behaviours that we're seeing in central government filter right the way through. I think they sort of set a precedent. They set, you know, of what's allowed, the behaviours that are allowed to go on. I've witnessed so much of bullying, misogyny, lying quite blatantly in front of sort of, you know, a group of parents. We'd sit there and they'd just lie to our faces. And I think the problem is if that's coming from the top, you know, it's a free-for-all.
Well, you mentioned bullying, sexism, you're talking about cultural misogyny. I mean, Damian, do you think the culture has changed? I mean, you were investigated by Sue Gray in 2017 after pornography was found on your computer in the House of Commons. I know you have said very strongly you had nothing to do with that. You did then subsequently resign. Do you think the culture has changed?
I resigned over a press release, but the culture is changing, but much too slowly. I mean, I completely agree that some of what we've heard recently, weirdly, one of the things that wasn't reported hugely, which struck me as bad as anything, was my colleague Anne-Marie Trevelyan saying that some man who's no longer an MP had sort of pinned her up against the wall. Now, that's completely, utterly unacceptable, and it shouldn't go on. The terrifying thing is that it was worse when I first became an MP 25 years ago. And the reason it feels worse now is in a sense, a good thing, because it's getting exposed and will get stopped, is that we're now much more transparent about it. We actually have set up a proper investigation and complaints unit, because 20 years ago, all of this would be going on and nobody would know about it. It was all, and frankly, interestingly for Charlotte, the journalists were part of the inner circle and they wouldn't report it. And now they're probably doing their job. Lobby correspondents are doing their job better. They don't participate in a sort of cover-up. So, and my overall point is that it reflects society as a whole. And the problem with Westminster, which ought to, of course, set an example, is that as society gets coarser and ruder and, in a sense, more difficult, particularly for women, so has politics, because all the terrible things we've heard happening inside Westminster, it's much worse online. If you're a woman politician, I bet Lou finds this as well, the abuse you get online and the sexism and misogyny online is absolutely appalling. I remember I was on this programme a few years ago with Angela Rayner, and we were comparing, when, as the programme does, it announces a few hours before who's on, we were comparing the abuse we were getting. I was getting sort of normal level abuse that politicians get. Angela was getting really, really horrible, sexist, personal abuse.
Can I interrupt you? I think that is true. There are these sorts of incidents everywhere. I think Westminster has a particular power structure problem. you have the most powerful people in the country working alongside people who may have just left school, they may have just left university, and that creates this huge power imbalance. And Damian is right, things have got a bit better. There are systems in place. A lot of people say they're slow, they say they're clunky, they could be better. But I think you could have all the structural changes in the world and you still have that big power imbalance, and it creates unpleasantness. And for people who want to take advantage of that, it is a very easy place to take advantage.
And what's your experience been of that?
I have found it very odd, to be honest. I started in Westminster when I was 21 years old. I was absolutely an idiot. I barely knew how to wash my own clothes. I was bumbling through the world, and I was very green and I was very new. And honestly, there was so much sexual harassment, so much.
From MPs?
From various people, not just MPs, people with power in a way that I didn't have power. And then I kept getting promoted and it started to fall away. And now I've got a column in a national newspaper and I speak on the radio every day, and no one ever sexually harasses me, nobody. Because I've got power, I could do something about it. And that scares me, because there are a lot of women who don't have that power. Yeah. And those are the women who will be dealing with your emails. If you write in with a problem, they might not be able to focus because they might be having to deal with that. And it's horrible.
The man at the back there in the white T-shirt and the blue sweater. Yes, you.
Louise made a comment earlier on about Rishi Sunak being out of touch. And do you think we see a lot of these ridiculous comments and a lot of this ridiculous behaviour because politicians are in this little bubble and they don't relate to the majority of the British public?
I mean, that's a really interesting point that sensible politicians agonise about. And the answer is you shouldn't be, because you're not in that bubble. One of the great things about the system that, you know, we're all spending the evening excoriating is the constituency link. You know, Louise and I have got constituents who have got all the problems we're hearing about tonight, and we have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis. So there is absolutely no excuse for any politician to be out of touch. So, you know, the system should militate against that. I think the answer to Charlotte's problem is more powerful women. So that, you know,
and
women can have
men
monitors.
behaving themselves better.
And people behaving better. Just politeness, just good manners.
Jack, by all means respond to what you're hearing, but let me just remind you of the original question, which is, do local Conservative candidates deserve to be punished in the local elections because of the Prime Minister and other Conservative MPs' actions?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, because I think that these elections are an opportunity to send a message, and so you've got to sort of separate out the needs of the local area and the needs to think nationally. But just to return to what was just said, there is a difference between heard experience and lived experience. And the trouble is we've got a government that's full of people that have no lived experience of how ordinary people survive. And that means that there is a complacency that happens. And what happened with Partygate and what happened with an awful lot of things during COVID, you know, that it's not just about whether they had parties, it's about, you know, the mis-selling of PPE, it's about the treatment of care homes, it's about an awful lot of stuff where you saw real complacency from this government that did an awful lot of damage to people and cost lives. And that is because they are in a bubble. They are in a bubble and they haven't experienced real life.
OK. I'm going to move on. There is a lot of criticism coming towards the government. I should just point out, Damian, in case you're not already aware, that more people voted Conservative in this audience than for any other single party. And this, of course, is on the night of the local elections. You mentioned COVID. Let's take a question from Chris Figanovsky.
As the government has been found to have acted unlawfully, discharging patients into care homes without testing at the start of the pandemic, should anyone in government be charged with manslaughter?
Jack, I'll come to you, obviously, because you wrote the drama Help about COVID in care homes that we saw at the back end of last year.
And we spent a lot of time talking to people who were on the ground who were dealing with it, and it was horrific. And I tell you, the thing that was most horrific was we were talking to people who were crying, and that's difficult when you're sitting on, and it was always done by Zoom. There wasn't an opportunity to be in rooms because we were in the middle of the pandemic and it wasn't safe. And when you're talking to people that's crying, that's always difficult. But they were crying because they felt they were responsible. There was one woman that just kept saying, "I let my gentleman down." And the reason why they felt that was because they had been isolated. And it's not just about the fact that this illegal putting people from hospital into the homes, which is atrocious and should never have happened. It's also about the lack of PPE. They have nothing. It's also about the restrictions on tests, which meant it was really, really difficult. They were restricted to 5 tests, which meant it was really difficult to isolate care users. So if a resident
What do you mean they're restricted to 5 tests per care home?
Yes, that they were restricted on the amount of tests they had per care home. And that meant that they weren't able to test properly. And we just heard so many stories, and there's stories actually worse than we could use on the programme, stories that we were told that we weren't legally allowed to use on the programme, of horrendous practice. And yes, there should be manslaughter charges, because if you look at the excess deaths, the World Health Organization came out with their excess deaths today, and if you look at the excess deaths, particularly in that first lockdown, the excess deaths in care homes, that was unlike any other country. And that is something where we personally as a country let an awful lot of very vulnerable people down and let them die. And when this inquiry happens, and it's long overdue, it's long overdue, heads should roll. Heads should roll. Serious heads should roll.
Wilfred.
The question was actually, should someone resign? I don't think they should. We've got to go back to context.
Well, the question was, should someone be charged? Should anyone in government be charged with manslaughter?
No, they shouldn't. And I think we should go back and really try and remember what it was like at the time. You will find with all of the reviews that they will be having that a lot of mistakes were going to be found to have happened. So, we know that a lot of people got it wrong. But it was a time of panic when people were trying to make decisions quickly. It's action. If you have the time to sit down and analyse data, it's very easy to make a decision. But when you don't have enough information, you've got to make a decision. As a business, you know that you've got to make decisions without enough sort of information, and you get it wrong. Now, the awful tragedy is this, and this is why it's so painful, is that vulnerable people died as a consequence of these decisions. So if there's one learning from all of this, is that we need to make sure that we protect our vulnerable in future. But I think it's a big ask to say that at the time...
We need to elect a government that cares about those vulnerable people. 60,000 of those first 100,000 were disabled people. Disabled people died because the practice of this government, and you talk about choices are informed by who you are as people. And I'm sorry, those people who controlled the government at that time did not care. And that is why these deaths happened.
Okay, I can't say that.
I will come to you.
The High Court said it was illegal. The High Court said it was illegal.
Said it was unlawful. The government was found to have acted unlawfully, discharging patients into care homes without testing to start the pandemic. Was Labour suggesting doing anything different at the time?
I think, the government... My colleague, Jonathan Ashworth, was warning government about moving patients into care homes right at the beginning. I remember
when exactly?
Back from the Sage Minutes in January 2020 contained warnings about this asymptomatic testing.
No, I know.
And all through...
But hang on, so Jonathan Ashworth, who's Shadow Health Secretary, didn't say anything about that in the Commons.
About patients being moved into care homes? Of course he did. Over and over again,
Not till April.
repeatedly. Right, OK.
After it started happening.
Right, OK.
Just to get the record.
Right, OK, apologies. I thought it came earlier than that. But absolutely, we were warning about care homes and about social care. I think the problem here is, and yes, we can say mistakes were made, honest mistakes were made, of course they were, but the problem that this exposes is that social care has for too long been the poor relation of health generally in our society, and that is because our society does not value or ask our politicians to value older people and vulnerable people that require care. And those people were the very, very tragic consequence of that. And the fact, as Jack says, that we don't have politicians in charge that valued the care system. But the government cannot claim that they were not warned. They cannot claim that the alarm bells were not rung, because throughout the pandemic and throughout from the beginning of COVID, colleagues were raising the alarm about care homes, and they owe it to bereaved families of all those that lost their lives to learn lessons from the pandemic. And sadly, when the Prime Minister made his apology in the Commons last week, he made this claim about not knowing about asymptomatic transmission. Well, again, Sage warned, the Lancet Journal warned, colleagues warned in the House of Commons. They cannot say they did not know, and they owe it to those bereaved families to prove that they will learn lessons. Sadly, I do not think they will.
OK. The woman here in the stripy T-shirt.
To raise a point, to go to a point about wider social care, it's not just the government who don't care about people with disabilities. Labour don't either, and that's systemic in local settings. For example, going back to COVID, my twin sister has Down syndrome. She goes to a day centre. The day centre by the council said, lots of vulnerable people, if they do not go, they lose their place. There is no other provision available. So then on a wider level, what my sister and her peers sit at home and do nothing because a Labour council have said we can't afford that because we don't spend money appropriately at a local level. So I think it is slightly unfair to say it's just, it's everywhere, it's systemic.
OK. The man at the back, yes.
I mean, now that COVID's over or effectively on its way out, we seem to be suggesting that at the time there was a lot of panic, as the gentleman on the panel suggested, so we couldn't make the right decisions. But now that COVID is over, we still seem to have a medical system where elderly patients can't get appointments, they can't get in to see doctors, they can't get into surgeries, they're having to wait long times to get into hospitals. Is the government really doing anything to protect the elderly?
Woman here in the red top at the front.
Wasn't it obvious sending elderly people from hospitals without testing into care homes with vulnerable elderly people would kill them? What was going on? What were they thinking?
What were they thinking, Damian?
Well, I was in government. I'm just going to pick up a point.
Would you want to pick up?
I'll pick up that point in a minute. Yeah, there are several points we've made. I have to say, I think the idea that, it was just simply uncaring because they don't have lived experience is grotesquely unfair on people, not just politicians, but officials as well, who were, as Wilfred said, taking decisions, facing a crisis of the type we'd not faced before in the modern age, very, very quickly. So you can say you got things wrong, we'll have an inquiry, but to demonise them and say it's just because they don't care that tens of thousands of people died is coarsening the debate in a way that is not fair to individuals across the board. And we won't know. The answer to the original question was, should there be manslaughter? It is not for a TV programme to act as a court. There will be an inquiry.
No, we're not acting as a court, but people can have their opinion.
Yeah, people can have. Yeah, but if you say somebody should be guilty of a very serious crime of killing someone, I think it's sort of appropriate for everyone to say, let's get all the facts first, rather than just say, whatever happens, I think loads of people are guilty of manslaughter. I don't think that's a responsible way to conduct a debate, and we were getting close to that.
What about the point that's been raised? Well, hang on a second. What about the point that's been raised and was raised by the Prime Minister and by the Health Secretary, that they were unaware about asymptomatic transmission of disease, even though Patrick Vallance talked about it in a radio interview, Lord Bethell, who was Health Minister, talked about it. Presumably, he didn't just tell the public, must have told the government as well.
I mean, who knew what when? I don't know. I wasn't inside government at the time. And that's why we have an inquiry. So that actually, because that kind of detail is obviously hugely important as, when to actually apportion blame. But my only plea is that let's get the facts first and then take the decisions.
I'm not suggesting that people get strung up now. I'm saying that...
You sounded like it, mate.
What I was saying was there was a number of excess deaths that are really, really problematic and are particular to this country. And that everyone talks about, well, it was the same across Europe and all that kind of stuff.
Let's hear a bit more from our audience.
Can I just say in reply to that, if there is a genuine care in the government, why... the care homes at the moment are begging for an adult social care infection control and testing fund to be brought back, which would mean that if you are a member of staff, if you are a care home worker and you have COVID, that you are supported financially during that time, and they are being refused it.
Okay,
if they care, then why is that not happening?
Let me hear. I hear your point. Let me hear a bit more from the audience. Yes, the man there in the stripy tie.
Yeah, I think it is unfair to blame the government of the day. Irrespective of what party's in power, they all make mistakes. Those of us here in this audience must know someone at least who's had COVID or even worse, has passed away from this awful pandemic. But this was an unprecedented occasion, very much like what we're seeing now in Eastern Europe, Ukraine. That's unprecedented. We're working through the situation, and I feel that the next time round we should be better prepared for this. But to single people out, I think is totally unfair.
Okay. Man at the back. Yes, I can't quite see what you're wearing. White shirt, I think.
Yeah,
yes.
you mentioned data. As a data analyst myself, if the data is not there, you do not make the decision. So why was the decision made?
Okay, and the man there in the black top. Yes, you.
There's small mistakes and there's big mistakes. I don't care if someone had a bit of cake. I don't care if someone had a beer after a long, hard day. But people have died. People's mothers have died. People's grandparents have died. Oh, we'll brush it off with an inquiry. It's what they always say. When do we not hear, oh, we'll have an inquiry? What happens? Nothing. People are dead. They can't bring them back to life.
So I think there's been a lot of focus on individuals and individual blame. It's really why I'm really glad you used the word systemic there, because I think it's really easy to talk about individuals. It's interesting, as you say, who ate cake when, who drank beer when, and we can all get really wrapped up in it as politicians, as journalists. But when I saw that court judgment, I went back to an article written by some of my colleagues at the Sunday Times. It was called 38 Days When Britain Sleepwalked into Disaster. I don't know, some of you might remember it. It was sort of the first inkling we had, really, of quite how wrong things were in the heart of government at the start of COVID. And it talked about this operation in 2016 called Operation Cygnus, basically a pandemic preparedness exercise. And they ran a test. They said, what happens if we get hit by a massive pandemic? And do you know what they found? They found that we weren't prepared. They found there wasn't enough PPE, there weren't enough ventilators. And what happened? Nothing was done to fix that problem. So I think, yes, there is this case to be made that individuals have their role, but that terrifies me much more than individuals. The states, the apparatus of the state's just simply not working. Dominic Cummings, a man who very much splits opinion, but really was at the heart of that, talked about his involvement in the pandemic response. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something like, we pulled the levers of government and the levers were made of chocolate. That is much more concerning to me than Keir Starmer having a beer, Rishi Sunak turning up for some cake.
OK. Let's take another question. We've got not that much more time, but I want to take a question. This is something that came up in the news today from Rebecca Hawkins.
Should Tracy Connolly, Baby P's mother, ever be released from prison?
So, no, I can hear from someone in the audience there. So, if you should need reminding, I expect you don't. Peter Connolly died. He was 17 months old in 2007 at the hands of his mother, Tracy Connolly, her partner, Stephen Barker, his brother, Jason Owen. All three were convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child or vulnerable person. They were cleared of murder, and little Peter had something like 50 separate injuries on his body when he died. Louise?
Well, it's actually not too dissimilar from the last question in a way, because children's services and protection of those most vulnerable children in society have also not been invested in over too long. And I would agree that it is not just a problem of the last 12 years when we've had Tory government, although it has been exacerbated by austerity, but it is a systemic problem as well. As to your specific question about the mother, I would completely understand all your willingness for her to stay in prison for the rest of her life, and that might well be my personal opinion as well.
So is that your personal opinion?
Yes, I would say it is my personal opinion, but it's not up for me as a politician to dictate. Certainly, that's up for the criminal justice system to decide. But as a society, we need to do much better by these very vulnerable children, and Baby P shocked the nation because of the terrible crimes of that woman and her partner, but also because of the very many failures in the system that had led to it, and the very many warning signs that meant that that little boy's life could have been saved. And we need to do much better as politicians and as a society to make sure that we save children in the future, like Baby P.
Charlotte, should Baby P's mother ever be released from prison?
So I'll be honest, you're getting an entirely emotional response from me here. I'm not an expert in criminal justice. I think I should absolutely say that, because I think columnists do probably rightfully get a reputation on opining on everything as they're an expert. I'm not. You're getting my response as a human being. I think this is really, really grim. The parole board make the decisions. As Louise is saying, we have to respect them. We have to trust it. My personal instinct, that it doesn't feel right, but I'm not the expert on it. It's their job.
The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, is saying the decision to release her demonstrates why the parole board needs a fundamental overhaul, including a ministerial check for the most serious offenders. Would you agree with that?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think there is a case to be made for it in that we elect politicians, we should have some say in the policing of our society. I worry it could leave it slightly open to populism. You don't want politicians having pressure put on them and then just bending to public opinion. I fear it could lead to people making choices about criminal justice based on wanting to get re-elected, which really feels absolutely terrifying to me. So I'm not sure.
OK. The woman there, yes, in the flowery top.
Hi, I'm a leader in a primary school, and this week I've been on a call, a safeguarding call, and they said that there is a national crisis with social workers. They just cannot be employed. So what happened with Baby Pete, which actually was quite a long time ago, is just going to continue to happen and happen and happen again unless more investment is made into the social care system.
Let me come to some more people in the audience. The man here in the front.
Right. When we're talking about the sentencing in this case, it was a 5-year sentence with a public protection order. She'd served 13 years. You're discussing whether she should be released or not is about 13 years too late. You should have been discussing that at the sentencing time. The fundamental problem that we've got at the moment with this isn't whether she comes out or not, this woman, I don't know, but it's about who makes those judgments. And actually, a parole board is a group of people who've been selected because of their experience in their areas of work around criminal justice and around mental health and around areas specific to rehabilitation. Do we want people like that to make the decision? And I think this was her third application.
Yes.
So she spent 7 years longer. My maths is rubbish. She spent a lot of time longer in prison than the judge gave her a sentence for.
I mean, she was released, and then she then had to go back into prison because there were concerns over her behaviour.
And now the parole board are deciding that this is a time to try her again in the community. I don't know whether that's the right or wrong decision. What I would say is that they have been appointed because they went through. They were able to demonstrate that they had skills and knowledge in their area. Do we really want Dominic Raab to make the decision?
Okay. The woman, yes, with the long hair there, yes.
I don't think any MP's in their role long enough to actually influence their area that they're chosen in. So how long is Dominic Raab going to be in charge of this sector? A few months, a year? I don't think there's enough time. They don't spend enough time in their roles to influence it. That's just my thought.
OK. Jack, should Baby P's mother ever be released from prison?
I mean, it's a really, really hard question, and I don't feel like a 43-year-old screenwriter is possibly the person to judge it.
Well, you've not held back on your opinions thus far, so
no,
feel free to
But I felt like I knew something
now.
about that, and this is, I think, really complicated, and I genuinely don't know how I feel. I genuinely don't know how I feel, and I'm really confused by it, and I think I worry about the politicisation of parole. I worry about the politicisation of the police. I don't think the police commissioners have necessarily added to public life in any significant way, and I think I probably would trust the parole board, but at the same time, her crimes are so heinous that it's hard to do so.
The woman there in the white T-shirt and the grey jacket, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. As much as we don't want to think that she's going to get released, is it not setting a precedent for everybody else that's been jailed since? That they're going to have to spend that much time in and they're not going to get a chance to be released? Or is it that they're going to get released and we're going to go through this again? There's so many young children that have been let down by the system and that have had such horrific injuries that they've lost their lives. But these people are just being put away for X amount of years. They're being let out, they're given new identities, they're letting to go on with their lives. This is what's going to happen this time. She's going to come out, she's going to get a new identity, she's going to get on with her life. Well, you know, it's going to be what happens to everybody that comes out of this situation.
Wilfred.
First of all, I want to say that it was a horrendous crime, and any of us who have children are sort of repulsed by this. Now, one of my favourite films, and I'll ask everybody to try and watch it, is called The Shawshank Redemption. And the question is this: do we think that some people are beyond redemption? I think that some people are able to redeem their crimes. It's about the period of time, but the idea that something as horrendous as this woman did means that she has to spend the rest of her life in prison, I think that actually that is not necessarily the right way of looking at this. The question is, we need to be told or shown that she has redeemed herself in a way that she could actually be forgiven for the crime that she committed.
Damian.
I think Wilfred makes a really interesting point, but I would pick up on Charlotte's point about who makes the decision, because all our instincts and emotions will be the same. It's such a horrible crime. Is it possible to imagine that this woman could achieve redemption in a way that would allow it to be acceptable for her to lead the rest of her life in as normal a way as possible?
What do you think of the Justice Secretary's suggestion that there could be a ministerial check for the most serious offenders?
Well, I'm always dubious about the quasi-judicial job of politicians, because we do have in the system several areas where politicians take decisions as though they were judges, and it's not our skill set. And I mean, as it happens, Dominic is a distinguished lawyer. So to answer the lady at the back, if you wanted a politician to take a legal decision, he is as good as anyone. But sort of in principle, I think people should do what they're chosen to do. And so I would prefer judges or parole boards to take decisions like this. And a politician should vote for and against laws in the House of Commons and make arguments in public and do what we want to do. And that mixing up those capacities makes me slightly uneasy.
OK, we've got about 30 seconds left. Yes, do you want to make a final point?
I want to say, obviously, we're not going to change what has happened. We can't change that the little boy has passed away. We should be focusing now on safeguarding and looking at the measures that we can put in place as educators, as healthcare professionals, as social workers, to stop this happening again in the future.
Our hour is up. We are at the end of our allotted hour. I just want to say thank you very much to the panel for coming this evening. Thank you to all of you for your contributions, impassioned, angry, thoughtful. It was great to hear them all. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time, until next week, bye-bye.